Hello everyone and welcome to this edition of the Cheat Meal presented by Deep Fried Draft. My name is Brian Bosarge. A little something different. We're going to go over basically a free agency recap up to this point. Free agency started on Thursday in the NFL, and as we all know, free agency and trades can shape what happens in the NFL draft. And so we're going to go team by team, division by division, and we're going to talk about some additions and subtractions about what has happened so far. Start with the Buffalo Bills. They signed two free agent fullbacks, which is just odd to me in the modern NFL. But they signed Patrick DeMarco and Mike Talbert. They also signed safety Micah Hyde and place kicker Stephen Hauschka, and they re-signed Lorenzo Alexander, who's coming off a career year in sacks. They lost corner Stephon Gilmore and wide receiver Robert Woods. So to this point, those players have not been replaced. Miami's been busy with some trades. We told you a few weeks ago about the potential for the Brandon Albert trade to Jacksonville. That's for a 7th next year. They confirmed the trade with Jacksonville where they acquired Julius Thomas, tight end, for a 7th round pick this year. That's pick 240. They also acquired defensive tackle William Hayes from the Rams, and they acquired a 7th round pick 223. The Rams will get pick 206, a 6th round pick from the Dolphins. The Dolphins re-signed wide receiver Kenny Stills and defensive end Branch. They also brought in linebacker Lawrence Timmons. Their only loss to this point is tight end Deion Sims, who at this point is more of a blocker than anything. No team has been busier than the New England Patriots, who have made several trades. We told you the other day about them acquiring tight end Dwayne Allen from Indianapolis, which is essentially the same trade they made last year for Martellus Bennett. A long rumored trade for wide receiver Brandon Cooks from New Orleans from New Orleans finally happened. They acquired Brandon Cooks from New Orleans and a 4th round pick this year, pick 118. New Orleans gets New England's 1st round pick this year, pick 32, and New England's 3rd round pick, compensatory pick this year, pick 103. New England also acquired defensive end Coney Ely from Carolina and a 3rd round pick in this year's draft, pick 72. In exchange for New England's 2nd round pick, Carolina receives pick 64. So essentially, New England drops down 8 spots in the draft and picks up Coney Ely. They did re-sign Alan Branch and safety Deron Harmon. And in a rare shock of them actually throwing free agent money out there, they brought in Stephon Gilmore, corner from Buffalo, and they brought in defensive end Lawrence Guy. Still waiting to hear whether they're going to re-sign linebacker Dante Hightower, running back LeGarrette Blount, or wide receiver Malcolm Floyd. They did lose tight end Martellus Bennett, and like I said, they basically replaced him with Dwayne Allen. They replaced Logan Ryan, who they lost here at corner, with Stephon Gilmore, and basically replacing Javal Sheard, the defense man they lost with Lawrence Guy. So basically, they have gone plus to all the minuses they have so far in free agency. The Jets' only addition up to this point has been offensive tackle Kelvin Beachum. They did lose wide receiver Brandon Marshall. Still waiting to hear what's going to happen with quarterbacks Ryan Fitzpatrick and Geno Smith. Offensive tackle Ryan Clady. They released center Nick Mangold. Could be a possibility he comes back on a cheaper deal. They also released corner Darrell Revis. But he has off-field issues at this point to deal with as well. Baltimore re-signed defense nose tackle Brandon Williams, which was one of the top available free agents. Another top free agent was safety Tony Jefferson. They brought him in, and they also brought in running back Danny Woodhead. Running back Kenneth Dixon, a 4th round draft pick last year for Baltimore, will be suspended for the first 4 games this year due to a PED violation. They lost Lawrence Guy They also lost fullback Kyle Juszczyk and starting right tackle Ricky Wagner. So that could be a spot that maybe Baltimore has to address in the first round. They also released pass rusher Elma Stumerville and corner Ladarius Webb. The Bengals have pretty much just been sad here in the offseason. They did re-sign Brandon LaFell, who was a okay number 2 receiver, and re-signed Dre Kirkpatrick at a position that the Bengals have significant amounts of depth, especially if they don't release Adam Jones. Still pending is running back Rex Burkhead. They lose franchise left tackle Andrew Whitworth. They lost probably the top guard available, Kevin Zeitler, who was a former first-round pick of theirs. And they also lost linebacker Carlos Dansby, who was one of their leading tacklers a year ago. That one doesn't hurt as much as losing 2 of your 5 starting offensive linemen. So, not good for the Bengals. For Cleveland, they have completely revamped their offensive line, going with the Dallas Cowboys approach of surrounding a young quarterback with a stud offensive line. They bring in Kevin Zeitler from the Bengals. They also brought in center J.C. Tretter, and a big extension for guard Joel Bitonio. And they bring in wide receiver Kenny Britt, which is the trade-off as they lost wide receiver Terrell Pryor. They also released Robert Griffin, and still pending on quarterback Josh McCown whether he'll be brought back or not. Pittsburgh up to this point has not brought anybody in as a free agent. They lost Lawrence Timmons and wide receiver Marcus Wheaton. Still waiting to hear what's going to happen with running back D'Angelo Williams and former first-round bust pass rusher Jarvis Jones. The big news out of Houston was the trade of Brock Osweiler that we talked about the other day, the NBA style trade where they essentially just admitted, yeah, we messed up and we got to get rid of this money. And Cleveland basically absorbed the money because they had over $100 million of salary cap room that they had to get rid of. And they acquired a second-round pick next year because of it. Houston also lost one of the top young corners in the league, A.J. Boye, and lost linebacker John Simon. Indianapolis, the Colts re-signed tight end Jack Doyle. They brought in Jabal Sher, defensive end from New England. They brought in John Simon from Houston. Still waiting to hear about safety Darius Butler and linebacker Eric Walden. They lost safety Mike Adams off their team. We talked about Jacksonville. They acquired Brandon Albert to play left tackle because they lost left tackle Luke Joeckel, who has not produced at a high level that he should have. They also traded Julius Thomas, which we talked about earlier. They re-signed guard Patrick Omame. They brought in one of the big free agent signings of the offseason so far has been them bringing in defensive end Calais Campbell. They also brought in A.J. Boye. They brought in safety Barry Church and another guard in Earl Watford. They lost Kelvin Beachum, corner Prince of Mukamara, and safety Jonathan Cyprien. But Jacksonville is better as of right now than they were this time last year. Titans brought in corner Logan Ryan from New England and safety Cyprien from Jacksonville. They re-signed defensive end Carl Klug, but lost Chance Warmack, which up to this point he has been probably what you'd call a bust. As a top 10 pick, hasn't produced as a top 10 pick. And they lose wide receiver Kendall Wright. I would expect them to address receiver early, maybe more than once in the draft. Denver brings in guard Ronald Leary from Dallas and brings in offensive tackle Menelik Watson from Oakland. He will try to replace Russell Okung, who they lose in free agency. And DeMarcus Ware, we're still waiting to see what's going to happen with him. Kansas City, nobody in. The only person out is Jamal Charles, who they cut. They don't have a whole lot of money to do much. Still waiting to hear on their nose tackle, Dontari Poe. Oakland, for some reason, thought it'd be a good idea to bring in offensive tackle Marshall Newhouse, who is pretty much a revolving door wherever he plays. He is terrible, and I don't know how he continues to find work. They lose Menelik Watson, we spoke of earlier. They also lose corner DJ Hayden. He signed with the Lions. He's a former first-round bust at corner. And they lose linebacker Malcolm Smith. And we're still waiting on their running back Latavius Murray. The Chargers re-signed safety Jaleel Vade and brought in Russell Okung to be their starting left tackle. They lose Danny Woodhead, but they have other backs that can replace his production, I believe. Dallas re-signed deep threat wide receiver Terrence Williams. They also bring in corner Nolan Carroll. That tells me they probably won't be bringing back Brandon Carr or Mo Claiborne at corner. Maybe they bring back Claiborne because of his injury last year and they get him a cheaper deal, but I don't think Carr's coming back. They lose safety Barry Church. They lost guard Ron O'Leary. They also lost defensive tackle Terrell McClain. And we're still waiting to see what's going to happen with Tony Romo. Are they going to release him? Are they going to trade him? Is he just going to retire? So Romo's holding up a lot of quarterback boards right now. The New York Giants bring in H-back tight end Rhett Ellison. They also bring in guard tackle DJ Fluker, another former first rounder who probably hasn't lived up to his hype. And was a good move for the Giants. They bring in wide receiver Brandon Marshall. Now it gives them a nice triumvirate at receiver between Odell Beckham, Marshall, and Sterling Shepard. They do lose place kicker Robbie Gould, and we're still waiting to see what happens with their defensive tackle Jonathan Hankins. Philadelphia gets wide receiver Alshon Jeffrey on a 1-year, $14 million prove-it deal. So you try to get a long-term deal done with him, see if he's back from his injuries, and he had a suspension last year. They also bring in Torrey Smith at wide receiver, so they're trying to reshape their wide receiver room a little bit. Would not be surprised to see them move on from Dorial Green Beckham or Nelson Aguilar this offseason as well. Maybe try to find a trade partner for some low-round draft picks or something. They bring in Chance Warmack, going to give him a shot to try to revitalize his career. They lose Nolan Carroll at corner. Still pending for them as they release defensive end Connor Barwin and Benny Logan, their defensive tackle. Waiting to see what happens with him. The Redskins, they re-signed tight end Vernon Davis, who's still got a little juice left in the tank. They bring in Terrell Pryor on a 1-year, $8 million deal. As it's another basically a 1-year prove-it deal for him. They bring in Terrell McClain from Dallas, a defensive tackle, and they also bring in safety DJ Swearinger, who's basically a one-man wrecking crew at safety. They lose nice young defensive end in Chris Baker. They also lost wide receivers Pierre Garçon and Deshaun Jackson. So they still have some work to do with their wide receiver room there. Move on to Chicago, who thought it was a good idea to bring in Tampa Bay backup quarterback Mike Glennon. He gets a big contract, but essentially breaks down to a 1-year, $19 million contract if you look at the language. So we'll see if he's still the quarterback next year. Kendall Wright and Marcus Wheaton come in as receivers to try to offset the loss of Jeffrey. They bring in tight end Deion Sims, who's more of a blocker than he is a receiver. They bring in Prince Amukamara at corner and safety Quentin Demps. They lose 2 quarterbacks in Matt Barkley and Brian Hoyer. We talked about them earlier, losing Jeffrey, and they also cut Jay Cutler. So their quarterback room, outside of Connor Shaw, who was injured and on IR last year, he's the only quarterback basically that was on their team last year that will be on their team next year. So he'll try to win a backup spot with Mike Glennon. I also would not be surprised if the Bears still draft a quarterback high in this draft, maybe as high as 3rd overall. Detroit trying to reshape their offensive line. They lose Riley Reef and Larry Warford, but they bring in offensive tackle, right tackle Ricky Wagner and guard TJ Lang from Green Bay. They also signed a nice blocking tight end in Darren Fales. Still waiting to see what happens with their defensive end, Devin Taylor. Green Bay re-signed their top pass rusher, linebacker Nick Perry. They also signed Martellus Bennett as a free agent tight end. So that probably means Jared Cook is not coming back. And they also brought in tight end Larry Kendricks. They lose, of course, we talked about TJ Lang going to their rival Lions. They also lost their center, J.C. Treader, so a couple of new offensive linemen going to be there for Aaron Rodgers. They lose veteran pass rusher Julius Peppers and safety Micah Hyde. Couple running backs pending still for them, Eddie Lacy, Kristen Michael, outside linebacker Dayton Jones, and tight end Jared Cook. Minnesota brings in Riley Reef from Detroit as offensive tackle. They also signed Carolina offensive tackle Mike Remmers. One of those guys will be replacing offensive tackle Matt Khalil, and they also need to replace cornerback Captain Munnerlyn. Still waiting to see what happens with Adrian Peterson and Cordero Patterson. Atlanta re-signed backup quarterback Matt Schaub and reserve tight end Levine Toilolo. They lose fullback Patrick DeMarco, and still waiting to see what happens with pass rusher Dwight Freeney. Carolina re-signed their defensive end Charles Johnson. They also brought in a wide receiver, Charles Johnson from Minnesota. They signed safety Mike Adams, bring in offensive tackle Matt Khalil, join his brother, who's center Ryan Khalil. They bring back Julius Peppers, who was a franchise staple early on, and corner Captain Munnerlyn. They lose Mike Remmers. They also lose wide receiver Ted Ginn and linebacker A.J. Klein. They lost both of those guys who signed with their rival New Orleans Saints, who also re-signed defensive tackle Nick Fairley to a pretty sizable contract. They also brought in Lions guard Larry Warford. They had cut earlier Jarris Byrd, and we talked earlier about their trading of Brandon Cooks. I'm guessing Ginn will try to replace what they're can replace some of what they lose with Brandon Cooks, but I would expect the Saints to perhaps draft a receiver, maybe not early, but it may be in the mid rounds. Tampa Bay re-signed defensive end William Golston. They also brought in young pass rusher from the Redskins, Chris Baker, and they bring in Deshaun Jackson to be a deep threat to try to take some pressure off Mike Evans. They lose backup quarterback Mike Glennon. No big loss in my opinion. I've said that when I talked about Chicago. I just don't like Mike Glennon. And pending, they're still waiting to see what happens with safety Bradley McDougald. And last division, we go to the NFC West, where the Arizona Cardinals bring in safety Antoine Bethea. They bring back linebacker Carlos Dansby, and they bring in kicker Phil Dawson to compete with Chandler Catanzaro. They lose Calais Campbell, Tony Jefferson, and DJ Swearinger, and waiting on linebacker Kevin Minter. Was not a good free agency period for Arizona, as they lose some pretty good young players and bring back some older players in return. The LA Rams get a franchise left tackle to protect Jared Goff with the Bengals' Andrew Whitworth. They also bring in a good number 2 receiving weapon for Goff with Robert Woods, acquired from Buffalo. They lose Kenny Britt, who had a resurgence with the Rams. We're still waiting to see what happens with their safety T.J. McDonald and their kicker Greg Zuerlein. San Francisco decided it would be a good idea just to bring quarterbacks in from the Bears quarterback room because, the Bears were so good last year. Let's bring in 2 of their quarterbacks. As they signed Brian Hoyer and Matt Barkley. They also trying to reshape their receiver room as they bring in Pierre Garcon, Marquise Goodwin, and Aldrick Robinson. They signed fullback, H-back, tight end Kyle Juszczyk to one of the largest deals a fullback has ever signed in the league. They bring in linebacker Malcolm Smith as well. They lose Antoine Bethea, Torrey Smith, and their kicker Phil Dawson. Still waiting to see what happens with Colin Kaepernick, who is a free agent. Seattle has added nobody. Their only loss is kicker Stephen Hauschka. So we'll see if they make or have any moves. That's going to do it for our free agent recap. Coming up on the website this week, deepfrieddraft.com, we'll have a new, all the position rankings will be updated. The top 100, expand that to 300 now. We're going to go 100, and then you'll also see 101 to 300. That's going up on the website this week. New mock draft coming probably Monday or Tuesday. Look for that. And then we'll probably get back into a schedule of some more DFD recipes coming up. But that's going to do it for today. As always, follow me on Twitter at DeepFriedDraft. Find me on Facebook at facebook.com/DeepFriedDraft. Search YouTube Deep Fried Draft, The Cheat Meal, or Brian Bosarge. And then click subscribe so you'll always see these videos. And as always, find everything you need to know about the NFL Draft at deepfrieddraft.com.